on Goblin Reddit. Today's story is...
My sister slept with my fiancé, and years later my father demanded that she be my maid of honor. His reaction when I canceled the whole thing was heartbreaking. I had always dreamed of my wedding. It wasn't just about the dress or the flowers, but about that special moment I had imagined since I was a teenager, marrying the love of my life in the perfect place. Andrew and I often talked about our wedding, and now that it was finally happening, it seemed almost unreal. We found the ideal venue almost immediately, a beautiful estate, the perfect size, intimate but elegant, a space where you could feel the warmth of the ceremony without it being overwhelming. The perfect balance. We spent hours choosing every detail, making sure everything was exactly as I had imagined it. Andrew didn't care much. He was happy if I was. He never pressured me, letting me make the decisions. Then came the dress. It took me a while to find the right one. A classic, timeless design, simple but elegant. When I finally tried it on, I knew immediately that it was the right one. I felt a thrill in my chest as I imagined walking down the aisle towards Andrew. I could already visualize his expression. I had imagined it 1,000 times, and it was as perfect as I thought it would be. But as we planned every detail, there was one aspect of our wedding that didn't involve my sister. I hadn't even considered inviting her. She was no longer part of my life, and I felt that my wedding was a way of moving forward, leaving the problems of the past behind. My sister had betrayed me in an unforgivable way. She had become involved with my first fiancé, the man I had trusted, the man I thought I would grow old with. The depth of that betrayal was still fresh, even though years had passed. The pain of discovering that the man I had planned to marry had not only been unfaithful to me, but also to my own sister, shattered my world. It took me years to feel that I could trust anyone again, let alone accept my sister back into my life. There were no apologies or acknowledgement of the damage he caused. He never admitted the pain he caused me, the fact that he had completely shattered my trust in both her and the man I loved. And yet, after all this time, my father still insisted that she be part of my wedding. I didn't want her there, not as a bridesmaid, not as a guest, not in any capacity. I couldn't imagine standing at the altar with my sister present, knowing what she had done. The idea of her being involved felt like a betrayal of everything I had fought to build since then. My relationship with Andrew, the life I had worked to create, and the peace I had finally found. But that wasn't something I had to explain to anyone. I had made my decision. This was my day. It was going to be everything I had dreamed of, and I wasn't going to let anyone, especially my father, force me to include someone who didn't belong there. As the weeks went by, I began to feel more and more comfortable with my plans. The guest list was shaping up nicely, with only the people I really cared about. It was a small event, just as I wanted it. My closest friends, Andrew's family and some extended family members. No drama, no awkward encounters, just love, laughter, and happiness. That was the vision I had in mind, and it was exactly what I needed. Andrew, of course, was completely supportive. He knew my sister and the damage she had caused, and agreed that it was my decision and that I didn't need to justify it. He told me from the start that he would support me in whatever decision I made, no questions asked. That was one of the things I loved most about him, his unconditional support and his ability to stand by me no matter what. He understood how important this wedding was to me and wanted me to have the day that was best for me, without the expectations of anyone else weighing me down. I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief as I planned. It was difficult to explain to someone why I hadn't even considered inviting my sister. She wasn't just someone from my past from whom I had distanced myself. She was someone who had hurt me deeply, and I couldn't just ignore that because she was family. It wasn't about holding a grudge. It was about protecting my peace, my happiness, and my future. Every time I thought about the wedding, I imagined walking down the aisle with Andrew waiting for me and the people who really mattered surrounding me. I didn't need anyone there who didn't understand that and who didn't respect the boundaries I had set to protect my heart. I didn't need anyone who thought they could come back into my life after what they had done. It was going to be perfect. It was going to be just as I had always dreamed. But of course, life doesn't always stay calm for long. It was only a few days after finalizing the last details of the wedding that my father called. At first I thought it was just one of those routine checks where he would ask how the planning was going and if I needed anything, but that wasn't what this call was about. I answered the phone and heard his voice immediately, warm but with an undertone that made my stomach tighten. He asked how the wedding plans were going. I could hear the smile in his voice, and I responded with equal enthusiasm, telling him about the venue, the dress, and how everything was coming together perfectly. I could already imagine the day in my mind. But then came the change in tone that warned me that something was coming. He mentioned my sister, and I braced myself. The words, once they came, settled in the air like an unwanted weight. He told me it was time for my sister and I to reconcile. He said this was a big day for the family, and it would mean a lot to everyone if she could be there as my maid of honor. He thought this was an opportunity for the family to heal, to unite, especially on such an important occasion. The words hit me hard, harder than I expected. How could he ask me to do this? After everything that had happened, after the betrayal, I tried to contain the wave of emotion that was rising in me, the shock, the pain. But it was difficult. This wasn't just a small misunderstanding or a bad argument. My sister had been involved with my ex-fiancé. The pain of that hadn't gone away, and now he wanted me to just ignore it for the sake of family unity. I struggled to keep my voice steady. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I told him I wasn't asking her to be part of the wedding. I didn't want her there. I hadn't seen her in years, and I wasn't going to let her into something so significant. I told him I wouldn't have her as my maid of honor no matter what. There was a long pause, followed by a deep sigh from my father. He didn't seem to understand the depth of my refusal. Finally, he said he understood what had happened, but that this was an opportunity to heal, to fix things between us. He told me it wasn't just about me. It was about the family, about us coming together. He said this was the time to do it. The word stung. How could she ask that of me? She didn't understand how deeply I had been hurt. It wasn't just about forgiveness. It was about self-respect. I couldn't pretend that things were okay when they weren't. I wasn't going to invite her back into my life for a day, not after what she had done. I told her this wasn't about healing. It was about me having the wedding I wanted, and that didn't include her. The silence on the other end of the phone lasted longer this time, and I could feel the tension building. My father now sounded frustrated. He said I was being unreasonable and holding on to a grudge. He told me that this was an opportunity for us to make things right, that I would regret not inviting her. He said that this wasn't just about me, that I was hurting the family by not including her. The way he said it made me feel like I was the one in the wrong, the one who was driving the family apart. I could feel the anger building in my chest. I didn't understand. I didn't comprehend the depth of the betrayal. But I wasn't going to let him make me feel guilty to change my mind. I told him I wasn't holding a grudge. I had moved on. I had built a life and I was fine. But I couldn't be manipulated into inviting someone who had hurt me so badly. I told him again that this was my day and that day would not include my sister. His voice was cold, as if a part of him had given up on changing my mind. He told me that I was being stubborn and that I would look back on this day with regret. He warned me that I would look back and wish I had let her back into my life, that I was ruining everything. I stood firm. This wasn't about regret. It was about making sure that my wedding, the one day that should be mine to enjoy and celebrate, was not tainted by the person who had betrayed me in the worst possible way. I wasn't going to let anyone manipulate me into doing what they thought was best. This was my wedding, and I would do it the way I wanted to. Update 1. He hadn't stopped calling. More and more insistent, more convinced that he was making a mistake. At first I tried to stay calm, responding with the same firm but polite words. I'm not having my sister at my wedding, Dad. It's not up for discussion. But the more he insisted, the harder it became to stand my ground. I couldn't escape the guilt that seemed to envelop me like a chain. Every time I called, it was like listening to his disappointment, his frustration dripping into my ear. You're breaking up the family, you know, he said, his voice breaking under the weight of his accusation. You can't just ignore her forever. It's not right. You have to find a way to heal this. It was as if he thought that my feelings, my pain didn't matter. He didn't understand what it was like to have someone you trusted completely, someone you thought was your closest ally, betray you in the most heartbreaking way possible. And yet here he was telling me that I should just forget about it for the sake of family unity. The tension was suffocating. Each day felt heavier than the last. My fiancé, always the calm, rational voice in my life, tried to comfort me, reminding me that it was my decision and that I owed nothing to anyone. But despite his reassurance, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was doing something wrong, that maybe my father was right. Was I being too harsh? Maybe there was room for forgiveness, but then all I had to do was think about what my sister had done, and the anger would come flooding back. It wasn't just about her being part of the wedding. It was about what she had taken from me. One night, after another phone call from my father, the floodgates opened. My fiancé found me sitting on the sofa, tears streaming down my face. I hadn't even realized that I was crying until he took me in his arms, holding me tightly as if he could absorb my pain. He asked me gently what was going on, and I confessed that I didn't know if I could go through with it. The pressure was becoming too much. I began to wonder if the wedding I had dreamed of was even possible. Every decision, every detail felt tainted by my father's constant demands. I was questioning everything. Was I being unreasonable? Was it wrong to want a wedding without drama, without my sister's presence hanging over everything? The emotional strain began to crush me. Every time I tried to focus on the excitement of the approaching day, I found myself returning to the same painful thoughts. I couldn't get the image of my father's face out of my head, his disapproval so palpable that I felt it could reach through the phone. The guilt began to feel like a heavy, suffocating blanket. Finally, in the stillness of the night, I made the decision. It was not an easy decision, and it came with its own wave of anguish, but it felt necessary. I was not going to go ahead with the wedding as planned. It was no longer just about my sister or my father. It was about my mental health, my peace of mind. I could not continue to sacrifice my happiness just to meet everyone else's expectations. The emotional strain was too much, and I knew deep down that the wedding I once imagined would never be the joyous occasion it should have been with all this baggage hanging over it. The decision to cancel was not an easy one. I knew it would hurt my father. I knew it would break his heart. But I also knew that if I didn't make this decision, I would never be able to look back on my wedding day and feel truly happy. So I quietly set about organizing something completely different. It was going to be smaller and more intimate, just a ceremony with my closest friends. The people who supported me, no matter what. There would be no pressure, no expectations, just a new beginning with my fiancé by my side. I didn't tell anyone at first. I needed to keep it a secret just for a while, so I could hold on to the peace I had finally found. The weight of my family's expectations had been replaced by a feeling of relief. It was no longer about making them happy, it was about making me happy. I didn't even have the energy to deal with my father's reaction yet. I knew he would be furious when he found out, but I didn't have the strength to explain. I wasn't sure how to make him understand that this wasn't a punishment for him or anyone else. It was simply what I needed. The closer the new wedding day got, the more I felt a sense of calm come over me. I could finally breathe. There would be no one questioning my decisions, no one pressuring me to conform to what they thought was right. This was my day, and for once, it was going to be exactly what I wanted it to be. I didn't know how my family would take it when they found out. I had made my decision. I had made it for myself, and that was enough. Update 2. The morning of my wedding day arrived, and I woke feeling more at peace than I had been in weeks. The tranquility of my suite was comforting. The absence of impending expectations, a welcome relief. I could hear the gentle movement of my fiancé in the next room. The sound of him preparing breakfast, something we had agreed would be a simple start to the day, just the two of us. In the days leading up to today, I had worked tirelessly to make sure everything was perfect, but in a completely different way to what I had originally imagined. I had spent countless hours coordinating with a small team, an officiant, a photographer, and a few trusted friends who were willing to keep the secret. They were my support system, people who respected my decision and understood why I had to take such a drastic step. The decision to call off the wedding had not been easy, but it was becoming clearer with every moment that it was the only option I had. The stress of dealing with my father's manipulations and feelings of guilt had been suffocating. There had been no room to breathe, let alone imagine the kind of day I had always dreamed of. The idea of walking down the aisle with my sister there caused me deep unease. So here I was, standing in front of the mirror in my dress, a quiet sense of satisfaction taking hold of me as I admired the reflection. It was the dress I had always imagined wearing on my wedding day, but it felt different now, lighter, freer. There were no anxious thoughts invading my mind, no doubts. I was doing exactly what I wanted to do without anyone's approval or opinion. When my fiancé entered the room, his eyes lit up when he saw me in my wedding dress. The look on his face, full of love and admiration, was all I needed to know that this was the right thing to do. We hadn't planned a big celebration, but we had each other, and that was more than enough. I hadn't allowed myself the luxury of focusing on what was missing, the absence of my father or my estranged sister, because I knew that having them there would only detract from the joy of the moment. A weight had been lifted from my chest, and it felt like I was finally free. We made our way to the venue, a small but beautiful location that I had chosen because it felt personal, intimate, and serene. The place was tucked away in a quiet part of a city, surrounded by nature. It was perfect for what I wanted. As I walked down the aisle, I felt a wave of peace wash over me. It was just my fiancé and I, exchanging vows in front of a few close friends who really cared about us. The ceremony was short, but perfect. After the ceremony, we moved to a nearby restaurant where a small reception was waiting for us. It was relaxing. There was no rush, no long speeches, but there was a lot of laughter. It was a far cry from the chaos I had initially expected, but it felt much more genuine. I could see in everyone's eyes that they were just happy for us, and that was all I needed. As we sat at the small table surrounded by people who cared about us, I thought about how things were before all this. Before my father's pressure, the damage caused by my sister's betrayal, the emotional toll of trying to please everyone. It felt a long way from where I was now. I felt free from the weight of other people's demands. I didn't have to play a role in some family drama. I didn't have to pretend that everything was fine because it wasn't. I could just be myself. We spent the evening talking, laughing, and enjoying each other's company without worrying what anyone else thought. It was a far cry from the tense atmosphere that had plagued my family for so long, and as I looked around the room, I realized something important. It didn't matter what my father thought. I was surrounded by people who loved and supported me, and that was enough. Update 3. I obviously didn't tell my father about the wedding. I didn't need to explain myself to him anymore. Instead, I posted the photos online, just like that. No pretense, no retraction. I certainly didn't owe him a call beforehand to give him a chance to try to persuade me not to. If he wanted to know, he could see for himself. It wasn't until a few days later that I received a call from him. He had clearly seen the post. He sounded like he'd been up for hours, pacing around in a rage. He demanded to know what the hell I was doing, accusing me of going behind his back, not even giving him the decency of telling him about the wedding. This was how I was repaying the family, he said. I couldn't help but laugh, a dry, bitter sound that cut the tension in the air. I told him why I really thought it would be different. He always thought he could manipulate me with feelings of guilt the same way he always had. It was pathetic, but that's what he always did. He made everything about him and what he wanted. I reminded him that I didn't have a sister, not in any real sense. And if he really thought that forcing me to accept someone who betrayed me with my ex-fiancé was going to work, he was wrong. I made it clear that it was never going to happen. He had never bothered to listen to me before, had he? There was silence on the other end of the line, thick with disbelief. I could feel him searching for his words, as if he wasn't used to hearing me stand my ground like this, but it didn't matter. I wasn't finished. I told him he should have known. If he had really listened to what I had been saying to him for years, he would realize that imposing her back after everything was a disaster waiting to happen. A betrayal like that doesn't just go away. I wasn't going to forget it because he said I should, or because he wanted to play at family as if nothing had happened. I told him he could take his guilt trips and manipulations and forget about it. He tried again, his voice trembling now. He said this was my family, my blood. He had been nothing but good to me. And this was how I repaid him. He always played that card, but it didn't affect me. I reminded him that he had been good to me when it suited him. All these years, I had been nothing more than an extension of his ego. He didn't care about me, what I wanted or needed. All he cared about was making sure that everyone played the roles he assigned to them. I told him that I knew that, and that he shouldn't try to play the victim now. He had brought it on himself. The moment he continued trying to bring that traitor into my life, he sealed his own fate. He fell silent again. His breathing was heavy. I could almost feel his mind racing, but he had no defense. And that's when I decided to tell him what would hurt him the most. I told him he could go ahead and live out his little dream of a perfect family with her at the center and everything. He could pretend that everything was fine now that he had convinced himself that I was the problem. I told him he could plan their wedding, and maybe she would marry someone else's husband next time. Then she could revel in the glory of her perfect family with her perfect daughter, who was nothing but a liar and a traitor. I could feel the weight of my words sinking in. I knew it was a hard blow, but it was the truth. He knew it too. Even if he didn't admit it, he had failed me. He hadn't seen that I would never forgive my sister for what she had done. And now he was facing the consequences. He tried to reply, but I didn't let him finish. I replied by asking him how he dared to try to dictate how my life should go. How dare he use his position as a father to manipulate me, to try to force me to do something I didn't want to do. I told him how he dared to pretend that everything he had put me through didn't matter, as if he didn't treat me like a child who couldn't make her own decisions. I reminded him that I wasn't his little girl anymore. I was tired of letting him control me. I was tired of letting him make me feel like I was wrong when he had done nothing but ruin everything he touched. I took a breath and then spoke slowly and deliberately. I told him that he had made me cry more times than I cared to count, and now I was surprised that he wasn't giving in. Well, that was too bad. He had made his choices, and now he would have to face the consequences. He was going to face the consequences of his actions, and I wasn't sorry about that. I would never regret choosing myself. His voice faltered, and he muttered something under his breath as he tried to regain control. But I was done. I told him that if he thought I was a fool who would fall for his tricks again, he was very wrong. I told him that he could go ahead and live out his fantasy of a perfect family with her, and I would live my life without him. I didn't need his approval. I didn't need his guilt. The last thing I said to him was simple. He could go play at being a family with someone else. I was done. I would live my life on my own terms without his interference, and that was that. I hung up before he could reply. The silence after I ended the call was deafening, but I felt lighter than I had in years. I felt as if I had finally cut the last thread that tied me to him. I had no regrets. As I stood there, my heart racing but steady, I knew one thing for certain. I would never again allow anyone, not even my own father, to dictate how I should live my life. I didn't need his approval, and I didn't need his guilt. The wedding had been for me, and I had made the right decision. Update 4. The post went viral faster than I could have imagined. I didn't post it to get attention, but somehow it took off. I had prepared myself for some negative reaction, maybe even some judgment for what I had done, but what I hadn't expected was the absolute outpouring of support from complete strangers. One commenter wrote that it was obvious who the real family was. Those who really cared about me, and not those who expected me to be a doormat. Another told me that I had shown immense strength in no longer letting my father's manipulation control my life. They said I deserved happiness without the toxic pressure of family expectations hanging over me. It was as if a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. As I scrolled through the comments, I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude. It wasn't just kindness, it was validation that I wasn't crazy for standing up for myself. But then there were the brutal comments directed at my sister. People were not holding back, and I could see why. They called her everything from a traitor to a manipulative teacher, and worse. It was tough, but I couldn't deny that it felt good to see others understand. One person even said that she had probably never been a true sister to me in the first place, and that someone who could betray their sister like that didn't deserve a second chance. Another comment said that if she had been honest about her actions, maybe I would have been more inclined to forgive her. But as far as they were concerned, she was the one who should be apologizing, not me. I had to admit it stung a little, but only because the truth hurts. The things they said weren't wrong. My sister had taken something irreplaceable from me and never apologized for it, and my father's behavior had only made it worse by pressuring me to fix it. Some strangers understood my pain more than my so-called family. The comments kept coming, a mixture of outrage and support that helped me confirm that I had made the right decision. People said that my father had never respected my boundaries and that my sister didn't deserve to be forgiven just because we shared blood. Betrayal is betrayal, no matter where it comes from. And I deserve to protect my peace. In the midst of all this, my husband has been my rock. He reminds me every day that I did the right thing in choosing myself. Our small ceremony, although not what I had initially planned, turned out to be exactly what I needed. No pressure, no drama, just pure love and support. I still haven't heard anything more from my father or my sister, and I'm fine with that. Silence is sometimes the best answer. I've learned that sometimes you have to let go of the people who hurt you, even if they're family. And at the end of the day, true family is not always the one you share blood with, but the one you choose, the one who loves you unconditionally and respects your decisions. I am moving forward with my life, stronger and more sure of who I am and what I deserve. I no longer apologize for setting boundaries. I no longer feel guilty about protecting my heart. And I certainly no longer let anyone dictate my happiness. This is my life, and it finally feels like it belongs completely to me.